But the one I want to talk about is known as the Apostle of the Alleghenies. And he is a very unlikely character who was a Russian prince by the name of Prince Demetrius Golitsyn, who became America's first priest, or I should qualify that. He was the first priest ordained to all the orders in the United States of America. There was one Frenchman who had been ordained to some of the minor orders in France, and was the first one to be ordained priest in this country. But Father Golitsyn was the first one to go all the way from his tonsure to the order of priest in the United States of America. And he was one of the first graduates of Saint Mary's Seminary in Baltimore, formed there by the Sulpician Fathers, or the Suspicion Fathers, as they're called by people who don't like them. Father Golitsyn, or as he was first known as, Father Augustine Schmidt, or Smith, came to this country in rather peculiar circumstances. His father was a man named Prince Dmitri Alexeyevich Golitsyn, and his mother was a German, Countess Amalia von Schmettau. He was born in The Hague, in Holland, a diplomatic town, and his father was a diplomat. He represented the Tsarist Russia in The Hague. The father was nominally Orthodox, the mother was nominally Catholic, but they had been totally, mentally roto-rooted by free thinking, totally Masonic ideas. His mother had lost the faith when she was something like 7 years old, thanks to the effects of a free-thinking tutor that had been hired by the family. The family had in their inner circle some of the most influential men of the Enlightenment. Denis Diderot, the encyclopedist, was a frequent guest at their home, and he would come and espouse his ideas. Now, Amalia was one of these exceptional women. So I guess the blue stockings, these ladies who would sit around and talk about erudite things and read books and discuss them and things like that. She was an educated woman, or she wanted to be an educated woman, and she was all into ideas. And she would go from one guru to another to learn what was some great system of learning, or some great system of ideas, or some wonderful spiritual knowledge or something. So she would pass from one weird, teacher to another. First, then Diderot, then this strange antiquarian, a Greek scholar by the name of Hemsterhuis. But she went from him to a German count who was Catholic by the name of Baron von Furstenberg. He was Catholic, very Catholic, and he was known to have a Catholic circle around him in Germany. Amalia, being a very spontaneous type woman, moved to Germany with the children. The prince, her husband, just sort of let her do her thing, and he would just stay there and do his diplomatic work. And she was going to move the family there, bring them up Catholic, learn from Furstenberg all of his wonderful ideas about education. He was a pioneer in education. After the Jesuits were suppressed in Germany, he took over all the schools in Westphalia and brought them up to a very high standard, and actually improved upon the Jesuit pedagogical techniques that were in the schools in those days, supplemented the curriculum with some other things that he thought were needed. They had two children, Mimi and Mitri, as they were called. Demetrius and his sister, whose name was truncated to Mimi. Demetrius was Mitri. Amalia found Mitri a very empty child. She was very outgoing, very accomplished, but her son was just sort of this pale, washed-out character who didn't have anything like a backbone or a spine, and really no spunk, no motivation to seize the day, as it were, and make himself great. She was going to be a Saint Monica, and he was going to be a Saint Augustine. At least that's what she thought. And she would turn him into a Saint Augustine if she had to beat him into it. So she would send him to all these classes and try to stir him up into some piety and zest for living and learning and so forth. And he sort of just plopped along. when he reached the age 20, now he was Catholic, so was Mimi. They converted when Mom did. When he was a young man of 21, it was time for him to do what all young men of the upper classes in those days did in Europe, and that was to go on his tour, to leave home and go on something of a world tour, to see the world, to experience real life, as it were, and then he would settle down into his career. Probably for him it would have been a military career, and indeed he did go into the military for some time. But that ended because of some of the vicissitudes of what was going on in Europe in the day. He couldn't travel in Europe at that time because of some wars that were going around, namely the French Revolution and some other places where there was some nastiness going on, things in Russia and so forth. So it was determined that he was going to go to America, to this new land. Now, it wasn't exactly a place. Gallitzin's years, by the way, are 1770 to 1840. If you picture what America was like in those days, it wasn't exactly the place for a Russian prince to be going on his cosmopolitan world tour. Okay? This is right after the American Revolution. There really wasn't that much to see. Okay? But Amalia didn't know that. Okay? They hadn't looked up tour guides on Google Books. Communication wasn't so great. So he came over in a very unlikely way with a priest who was a mathematician, a German priest who was a mathematician who wanted to be a missionary in the United States among German speakers. Bishop Carroll had asked for some German-speaking priests. And Amalia determined that this German priest was going to go over, whom she knew, would spend a year or so as Mitri's tour guide all across the United States of America. Bishop Carroll didn't exactly take kindly to that. Thought it wasn't exactly the best idea that this priest that he needed was going to function as a tour guide for this Russian prince. So he quickly determined that he'd put the priest to work and he'd stick Mitri in the dormitory of St. Mary's Seminary until he could figure out what to do with her. Couple of weeks in the dorm of St. Mary's Cemetery, and he determines that he's going to be a priest.
Aggressive state.
And he writes home and tells Mom about it, who wasn't very thrilled, even though she was like super mom, super Catholic. She wanted a St. Augustine as her son, and it looked like he might just go that route. It did appear that he was going to do it her way. So she being a bit hard-headed, said, didn't readily approve, and he wrote back and said, well, I'm doing it. So he entered the seminary, and because of his superb education that he passed with flying colors, as they say, and was ordained to the priesthood. Had a very rough start to his priesthood because he wasn't good at dealing with people. And there were lots of problems in this pioneer church in America. And Bishop Carroll, and we've already criticized him, but we have to show him some sympathies. He had a real rough job. He had this enormous diocese that covered all of what were the colonies and all of what now is the Republic. And not only that, but he had some pretty odd priests to deal with. Some, in the traditional movement, we're familiar with some odd priests who sort of blow in and blow out because they're kind of hiding from the establishment, as it were. Right? I'm sure some of you have run into that sort of thing. Well, the New World was a refuge for such people, too. You'd have these very odd folks from France come over, or mostly from France. I don't know why. But the early priests in Boston, in the city of Boston, were these French priests who came to find out had been suspended in France. Many suspended priests escaped Europe, came to France, showed people, oh yeah, I'm a Catholic priest, and they basically set themselves up in these parishes. Okay, they had all these independent parishes and stuff. It was a bit messy. Bishop Carroll had to deal with all this. So to get a good priest was something he really treasured. Okay, so it was difficult for him to assign priests to the right assignments and all this. Well, short on in his priestly career, Father Gallitzin is sent on a very faithful sick call. There was one Mrs. Burgoon, who was a Protestant woman who was dying. And she was on a settlement in the Allegheny Mountains in western Pennsylvania called McGuire's Settlement. Now, McGuire's Settlement was named McGuire's Settlement after Michael McGuire, who had been a captain or a lieutenant in the Revolutionary Army, and he was Irish and he was Catholic.